Hi everybody. So for my interesting industry topic, I'm going to be talking about Amazon Prime's decision to give their new original movie, Air, a theatrical release window. And it'll be the first movie that Amazon Prime has given that to since Mindy Kaling's Late Night, all the way back in 2019, so almost 4 years ago. And you're probably thinking, okay, cool, like, I guess. And it is. But why? And because it highlights a very interesting new relationship between theaters and streaming services that has been growing since around 2019, so the pandemic. And just for context, as we all know, the pandemic essentially kneecapped the movie theater industry. And you can see that in the numbers that I have here. So total tickets sold and total domestic box office returns, both in 2019, were essentially the highest that the industry ever saw. 1.2 billion tickets sold, $11 billion in domestic box office returns or revenue, and then cut to only a year later, both of those numbers are drastically reduced to fractions of what they were before. And you can see on the graph that while there has been a gradual uptick since then, it's still struggling to regain any semblance of what it used to be prior to the pandemic. And we all know that while one industry was having its literal worst nightmare, another is having the best time ever. And you can see in the key streaming services, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, and HBO Max, while the theater industry was struggling, these four were thriving, seeing gradual and arguably massive annual returns from the same amount of time. But so why is that relevant? Why does that matter? Because theaters aren't going anywhere, despite what it might look like. A report published from the United Talent Agency in 2023 found that roughly 2/3 of Americans that they interviewed don't care about theatrical release windows, and they arguably never have. So what does that mean? Theatrical release, for example, say Top Gun. Top Gun comes out in theaters in June, but it's going to take all the way until early August for it to come out on HBO or Hulu. 2/3 of Americans will not wait that long to watch it for free in their own home. They would much rather spend the $10 or $15 that it takes just to go see it right then and there. And beyond that, theater-released movies have higher engagement and they're more memorable. 75% of the same people that were interviewed and surveyed could not recall the last streaming original they saw, but they could absolutely recollect the last theater they saw in movies. And funny enough, when they could recall streaming original movies that they'd seen, it was usually a theatrical movie that was being shown on that streaming platform. And so when the UTA asked people why they weren't wanting to go to theaters or what was keeping them from going to theaters to see these movies, only 1/3 or 28% of people said that streaming options were the reason why they preferred to not go. Mostly, by and large, the reasons why people weren't going to theaters based on this study was because of health issues or cleanliness concerns, having to do with either the theater or their own personal preference because of the pandemic. And because of this, we're seeing more and more streaming services give big original titles theatrical releases. And they've been seeing a huge benefit from doing that. For example, Netflix's top 3 out of their top 5 movies had theater release windows. So Pale Blue Eye, White Noise, and Glass Onion did wildly well, and all 3 were briefly released in theaters. So extra audience engagement and added revenue are very valid reasons for a streaming service to release its properties in theaters, but it might not be the only reason. And what else could it be? One of the reasons I think it could also be has to do with actors. Actors' wages are affected by direct-to-stream movies because the movies that they take on that have box office releases, I'm not entirely sure what happens if it does worse than it's expected to. But if a movie does better at the box office than it's supposed to, the increase that it sees, the actors see that in their pay as well. However, with direct-to-stream movies, the money that they make is a fixed number. It can't increase regardless of how much engagement that movie receives on the platform. And we saw something interesting happen with Scarlett Johansson in the release of her movie Black Widow back in, I believe, 2020, 2021. Disney decided that they would release the movie briefly on their streaming platform before the 90-day theatrical window of the movie was over. So they did that, and it garnered a lot of engagement, but it undercut the hell out of their box office returns. therefore shorting Scarlett Johansson's salary by a ton. So she obviously got pissed and she sued. But other streamers have clearly learned from that, and they've given their movies the theatrical release windows first to allow their actors to get that little pay bump, and then they release it on their platform afterwards. And what this does is, I think it incentivizes higher brow actors, higher caliber actors, to come onto these projects that they normally wouldn't touch because of that salary difference, giving us better content. And you can see that in Christian Bale in The Pale Blue Eye, Adam Driver in White Noise, the entire cast of Glass Onion. I don't know if they would have done it had it been a direct-to-streaming release. And why else would streamers put their stuff in theaters? Mostly because people want to go out. People have been cooped up in their homes for 2 years. The last thing they want to do to watch a movie is sit on their couch. You can do that any day. And streamers know this. They know that if they give a limited time theatrical release, people are obviously going to go and see it. I obviously went and saw it. I did it with all 3 of the movies that Netflix had in the previous slide. But there's one more big reason, and it's maybe the biggest out of all the 3: award shows. So a theatrical release makes a streaming movie eligible for most of the theatrical awards, and that only requires a 7-day release window. And Netflix has already been seeing the benefits of doing this and putting it into practice. They won 6 Oscars this year alone, I believe 4 for All Quiet on the Western Front, and then 2 for Pinocchio. And it's only incentivizing these other streaming platforms to do this more. They stand to gain immeasurable amounts of clout for doing this. And so, in conclusion, we can see that this symbiotic relationship between streamers and theaters is only going to continue and get stronger. And we can see it now in A24 releasing a series in partner with Netflix, Beef, which, by the way, has been wildly popular already. And it's only been out for about a week or 2. And I think it's only going to continue. So, I hope you found this as interesting as I did. Thank you for watching.